The first thing I noticed when I crossed the county line was the smell. Not the clean postcard smell people imagine when they say the coast. Not just salt and sunshine. Not the bright, touristy tang of taffy shops and sunscreen. This was the other smell. The one that comes when the clouds sit low enough to lean on the treetops. Wet cedar, mud, diesel, rotting kelp bruised underfoot. The kind of air that made the inside of my nose feel cold, like I'd breathed in a spoonful of the ocean, and it hadn't decided whether to be kind. My windshield wipers worked too hard for a rain that wasn't quite rain. Mist beaded and slid and smeared into a grey film. The road twisted down out of the coast range and spit me into a world that looked rinsed of colour. Spruce forest, slate sky, the occasional flash of a river the colour of pennies. When I'd left 12 years ago, I'd sworn I could live the rest of my life without this particular shade of grey. But grief has a way of dragging you by the wrist back to the places you thought you'd outgrown. A green sign announced the town the way it always had. Harbour Point, population number scraped off by time. Someone had nailed a wooden salmon underneath it years back, the paint sun-bleached and flaking. In my memory, the salmon had been glossy and defiant. Now it looked like it had been left out too long. I turned off the highway. The streets here didn't so much have lanes as they had suggestions, faded lines and puddles. The downtown strip was a shallow row of buildings that never quite filled their storefronts. A diner with fogged windows, a bait shop, a thrift store with a handwritten sign about donations, the old cannery building at the edge of the water, half renovated into artisan spaces that never stayed rented. The harbour itself was a scatter of masts and a few working boats, their hulls streaked with rust and algae, rocking in the slow-breathing water. Gulls screamed over everything like they'd been insulted by the weather. I passed the place where the fireworks stand used to appear every July beside the grocery store. I passed the high school, brick and flat, its football field drenched and empty. I passed the turnoff to the beach access where my friends and I used to go at night, with cheap beer and the kind of confidence that only comes from believing the worst thing that can happen is getting caught. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, as if the road might try to take it from me. Dad's house sat on the bluff side of town, where the trees leaned toward the sea. It was an old, low-slung place, cedar siding gone silver, roof patched in mismatched shingles. The yard was a stubborn patchwork of moss and wet grass. A single porch light glowed anemic yellow under the eaves, though I didn't remember leaving it on. In my memory, Dad hated wasting electricity. In my memory, Dad hated a lot of things. I parked beneath the dripping branches of a Sitka spruce. When I stepped out, the air slapped me with cold damp. The mist slicked my hair back along my scalp. Somewhere below the bluff, the ocean made a low, constant shushing sound, like it was trying to hush the whole town. My suitcase thumped on the porch boards. The key in my hand was familiar and wrong. Metal warmed by my palm, teeth worn smooth from years of use. The realtor had left it with the funeral director, who'd handed it to me with the same gentle tone people use when they're trying not to look startled by how young you seem to be an orphan. I hesitated before I unlocked the door, like I expected my father to open it from the other side, scowl at my hair, blame Portland air for making me soft. The lock turned without complaint. The door stuck, swollen from years of wet. I leaned into it. Wood creaked. The hinges groaned. a smell spilled out toward me. Dust, old coffee, cedar, and underneath it, something sharp and mineral, like seaweed dried on rocks. The living room was exactly as I'd left it, and not at all. Dad's recliner sat by the window toward the water, as if he'd gotten up only minutes ago. A folded throw blanket lay on the arm. His boots were gone. The side table held a mug with a ring of brown at the bottom and a crusted spoon angled like a question mark. In the corner, the old fish tank stood empty, its glass cloudy with neglect. I'd begged for guppies when I was 10. Dad had bought them and never changed the water. And I'd learned early what happens when you want something living from someone who doesn't know how to keep it alive. I set down my suitcase and stood in the foyer listening. Houses make different sounds depending on who they belong to. In Portland, my apartment made a constant hum. Heat pipes and neighbor footsteps, the distant shudder of buses. This house breathed more slowly. The refrigerator clicked. Rain tapped the windows. Somewhere, deep in the walls, a pipe ticked like an insect. I realized, with a slow, unpleasant clarity, that the quiet here was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of something waiting. I shook the thought off like water. Grief does weird things. Exhaustion does weird things. I'd driven 3 hours from the city, body tense for the whole winding descent. My mind was reaching for shadows to fill in the gaps. The kitchen was small and clean, in the way Dad's spaces always were. Spartan, wiped down, no clutter left out. A calendar still hung above the counter, last month's days left unchecked. The last thing he'd written on it, in square block letters, was Tide and a time. I pressed my fingers to the paper. It was slightly damp, as if the house's breath had softened it. My phone had 2 bars of service, enough for a text. Here, I wrote to Marisol and hit send before I could change my mind. Marisol had been my best friend in high school, my co-conspirator, my oxygen. We'd sworn we'd leave together, and then life had happened, the way it does in towns like this. One person makes it out, and the other becomes the person you watch from social media. A light moving away over dark water. She'd messaged when Dad died. If you need me, I'm here. It had felt like a bridge tossed across a gap. I wandered the house with my coat still on, not ready to settle into it. The hall smelled faintly of mothballs and old soap. Dad's bedroom door stood open. The bed was made tight, hospital corners. His dresser held the same neat stacks of flannel shirts he'd worn for as long as I could remember. On top of the dresser sat a small wooden box I didn't recognize. My hand hovered over it. The urge to open it was sharp, almost physical. But I didn't. Not yet. There would be time, I told myself, as if time were a spoon I could ration. Instead, I went out to the attached garage, where Dad had spent most of his life in the hours he wasn't on the water or at work. The door from the kitchen stuck too, but less. The wood here was newer. The smell hit me right away. Oil, cold metal, damp cardboard. Dad's boat trailer sat in the center, empty. He'd sold the skiff years ago, after his knees started to go and the ocean became less forgiving. Along one wall, Shelves held careful rows of tools, labeled bins, a coil of rope, floats, old fishing gear. I ran my fingertips along a workbench scarred with cuts and burns. My chest ached with an emotion I couldn't name. Something like anger, something like longing. Dad had always understood objects better than people. He'd fixed radios, engines, doors. He'd never fixed us. A sound drifted from the far corner of the garage. At first, I thought it was outside. Wind, maybe, or the distant complaint of foghorn. But it had a rhythm, a pulsing crackle, like a campfire trying to start. I followed it past the shelves. On a low table beneath a window sat a marine radio, the old kind with a chunky mic and a faded display. Dad had used it when he volunteered with search and rescue. I remembered him sitting in this garage late at night, the radio hissing, his shoulder tense as he listened for voices that might mean someone was alive. The radio screen glowed dim green. I stared. Dad hadn't had power tools plugged in when I'd arrived. I hadn't touched this table. Yet the display was on, and the speaker spilled soft static into the damp air. My skin prickled along my arms. The channel number on the display flickered. 16. The emergency channel. Something in my throat tightened. I stepped closer, as if my body believed I could smell danger like smoke. The radio crackled. Then, beneath the static, came a sound that wasn't quite sound. A thin, wavering voice, like it was traveling through water. Hello? The word was so faint, I couldn't be sure it was a word. It might have been a gull. It might have been my own breath catching. Then the speaker popped, and the voice came again, clearer. Leah? My name hit me like a hand on the shoulder. I froze. My heart kicked hard once, then started pounding in a way that made my throat ache. The rational part of my brain flared up with explanations. Kids with radios, interference, someone on a boat using the wrong channel, someone saying something that sounded like my name. The town was full of fishermen and bored teenagers, and people who bought old equipment at estate sales. But my feet didn't move. My hands didn't lift. I stood there like my body had decided to become furniture. The radio hissed. Leah, the voice said again, drawn out, breathy, the syllable stretching as if the person speaking was too tired to finish it. My mouth opened. Nothing came out. I cleared my throat and managed, hello? My own voice sounded thick, wrong, swallowed by the garage. Static spilled back. No answer. I stared at the mic clipped to the side of the radio. Instinct said, pick it up, respond like Dad would have. But my fingers wouldn't obey. The display blinked once, then went dark. The garage fell into normal silence, the only sound the rain and the faint shush of ocean beyond the bluff. For a moment, I was sure I'd imagined it. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. I flinched hard enough to jab my hip against the workbench. Marisol. I'm on my way. Don't be alone tonight. I swallowed. The back of my tongue tasted like pennies. I stared at the radio, now blank and dead, and felt something cold settle in me with the certainty of a tide. I told myself the radio must have been left on. The power might have flickered. The voice could have been anyone. Coincidence wears a convincing face when you're looking for patterns. but I couldn't shake the sensation that the voice had known exactly where to find me, that it had been waiting for me to open the door. Upstairs, the house seemed warmer after the garage, as if the kitchen light had decided to be kind. I made coffee because it was something to do with my hands. Dad's old percolator sat on the stove, dented and blackened at the bottom. I used it anyway, because using anything else felt like admitting he was gone. While it brewed, I walked to the window by the recliner and looked out. Fog moved in slow sheets over the water. Beyond the glass, the sea was more felt than seen, grey beyond grey, the horizon erased. The spruce branches outside swayed slightly, dripping. As a kid, I'd loved fog. It made the world feel smaller, like it was wrapping itself around our house. Safe. Now it looked like something creeping closer on purpose. I sipped the coffee. It tasted burnt and familiar. I took my suitcase down the hall to my old room. The door stuck too. When it opened, the smell of old carpet and closed air hit me. The posters I'd left behind were gone, replaced by bare wall. The bed was made with a faded quilt. A small desk sat under the window. And on the desk, as if placed recently, was a cassette tape. No label, no case. Just the tape. Black plastic. Its clear windows revealing the spooled brown ribbon inside. I stared at it. Dad had kept old tapes in the garage sometimes. Weather recordings, radio logs. But why would one be in here? My throat tightened again. The air in the room felt damp, like the fog had found a way through the walls. I set my suitcase down slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements, as if the room might spook. There was no cassette player in my room. There hadn't been one in years. But as I stood there, staring at the tape, I realized I could hear something else. A faint tapping sound. Not from the walls, not from the window, from beneath the floorboards. If floors can have beneaths that aren't just crawl space and dirt. Tap, tap, tap. 3 soft knocks, evenly spaced. I went still. The tapping stopped. I backed out of the room with my eyes on the desk. I closed the door, the latch catching with a click that sounded too loud. In the hall, the house was quiet again. Normal. As if it hadn't done anything strange at all. My hands were shaking. I exhaled slowly, trying to drain the adrenaline. Grief. Stress. Old houses make noises when they settle. Coast air does odd things to electronics. That was what I told myself. Then, from somewhere in the living room, came the sound of a chair creaking under weight. I turned toward it. The recliner by the window rocked slightly, just once, as if someone had shifted in it. No one was there. I stood in the hallway and watched the empty chair until my eyes started to sting. My pulse beat in my ears. I forced myself into motion. I grabbed my phone and my keys and decided I needed air, even if the air outside was wet and sharp. I walked out onto the porch. The wood was slick under my boots. The mist kissed my cheeks like cold fingers. The fog had thickened. The world beyond the yard was blurred, edges softened. Down the street, a porch light glowed through the haze. Somewhere, a dog barked and then stopped abruptly, as if reprimanded. I walked to the edge of the yard, where Dad's old fence leaned crooked. I looked down the slope toward the beach access path. I could just barely see the stairs descending, swallowed quickly by fog. As a teenager, I'd run down those stairs in the dark without thinking. Now, standing at the top, I felt a deep reluctance in my bones, like standing above a trap door. The ocean made its steady hush. The fog moved. My breath came out in pale puffs. Behind me, from the house, came 3 soft knocks. Tap, tap, tap. Not from inside, not from the floor, from the front door. I turned so fast my neck hurt. The porch light illuminated the door's wet wood grain. Nothing else. No shadow. No movement. The knocks didn't repeat. The fog pressed in like a held breath. My mouth went dry. I felt the irrational urge to whisper, "Who is it?" like this was a neighbor and not something else. Instead, I walked slowly to the door and put my hand on the knob. The metal was cold enough to bite. I listened. Nothing but the ocean and the rain and my own blood rushing. I had the sudden, vivid memory of Dad telling me when I was little, after my first nightmare, "If you don't answer, it goes away." At the time, I thought he meant the fear itself. Now, standing with my hand on the knob, I wondered if he'd meant something else. I let go of the knob and stepped away. I went down the porch steps into the yard, as if distance could protect me. The fog seemed to thicken in response, swallowing the edges of the house. The porch light became a smudged halo. I stood in the wet grass, heart pounding, and waited to see if something would come out of the fog toward me. Nothing did. When Marisol's headlights finally sliced through the grey, I almost sagged with relief. A truck, a weathered pickup with a cracked windshield, pulled up beside mine with a familiar rattle. She opened the door and stepped out, her boots hitting the gravel hard, like she was angry at the world on my behalf. Marisol looked the way people do when they've stayed in the same place while you've changed. Older, yes, but also rooted. Her hair was pulled into a messy knot under a beanie. A ring of keys clipped to her belt. Her cheeks were wind-reddened. She wore a battered rain jacket that looked like it had survived more storms than I had. She took one look at my face and said, "You've been in there alone." "I got here an hour ago," I said, my voice sounding thin. "I'm fine." "Bullshit." She walked up the porch steps and pulled me into a hug that smelled like coffee and cigarettes and rain. The pressure of a familiar body loosened something in my chest. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been holding myself until she forced me to soften. When she pulled back, her eyes searched mine. "How'd you sleep last night?" "I drove this morning. I haven't..." "Okay." She nodded, as if checking off items on a mental list. "We're going to eat something. Then we're going to go through the house together. You're not doing it alone." "I don't need..." Marisol held up a hand. "Leah, you don't get to be tough in Harbor Point. It's illegal." A laugh tried to escape me and turned into something that felt more like a cough. "Fine," I said. She looked toward the fog-eaten street. "Town's quiet. Half of them will pretend they don't know you're here. The other half will watch from behind curtains like you're a raccoon in the trash." "Sounds right." She stepped closer to the door, then paused. "Did someone leave the porch light on?" "I thought maybe Dad..." The words snagged. I swallowed. "I didn't turn it on." Marisol frowned but didn't comment. She unlocked the door with the ease of someone who's been in this house 100 times, even though, I reminded myself, she hadn't. Not since we were kids. Not since I'd left. Inside, the living room's familiar stillness didn't feel as oppressive with another person in it. Marisol moved through it like she belonged, dropping her keys on the table, shrugging off her jacket. She glanced at the recliner by the window. God, he still had that thing. Yeah, I said. Marisol's gaze softened just briefly. I'm sorry, she said, quieter. I know it wasn't easy. It wasn't the kind of sorry people say at funerals. It was the kind of sorry you say when you know someone's grief is complicated and you're not going to try to simplify it for your own comfort. Thanks, I managed. In the kitchen, she opened cupboards like she was looking for evidence. Do you have food? I didn't check. Okay. She pulled out a can of soup from the pantry, as if she expected it. You still like tomato? I still like not starving, I said, and she smirked. While the soup heated, Marisol leaned against the counter and looked at me over the rim of her coffee mug, like she was trying to read the years between then and now. You look tired, she said. I'm fine. Leah. I exhaled. Weird thing, I said, because once the words were in my mouth, they were hard to keep in. The marine radio in the garage was on when I got here. It had a voice on it. Marisol's eyebrows rose. A voice? It said my name. The kitchen seemed to go quieter around us. The refrigerator hum sounded louder. The rain's tapping sharpened. Marisol's face shifted. Not quite fear, not quite surprise. Something like recognition. She set her mug down carefully. Okay, she said. Tell me exactly what you heard. I told her. The static, the channel, my name coming through like a thread pulled tight. When I finished, Marisol stared at the counter for a beat. Then she said, maybe someone was messing with you. On channel 16, in my dad's garage. People do dumb stuff. But her voice lacked conviction. She rubbed her thumb along the rim of her mug, a nervous habit I remembered from high school. Did your dad ever... She stopped, restarted. Did he ever talk to you about the Johnson girl? The name made my stomach drop, as if my body had been waiting for it.